ICE dragged out naked children, zip-tied to each other, and stuffed them in vans. On Tuesday night, 300 federal agents with ICE, Border Patrol, ATF, FBI raided an apartment building in Chicago on South Shore Drive. They came kitted for combat. They were wearing armor. They had rifles. They used flashbang grenades. They fast roped out of a Black Hawk helicopter onto the roof. This is a residential apartment building in Chicago. Agents detained every single man, woman, and child in the building, regardless of their immigration status. They broke down the door of U.S. citizens, zip-tied them, and dragged them out to waiting U-Haul vans. They presented no warrants and allowed no one to speak to a lawyer. Roderick Johnson, 67, one of many residents who were detained by federal agents during the South Shore raid. A U.S. citizen, he says agents broke through his door and dragged him out in zip ties. Johnson says he was left tied up outside the building for nearly 3 hours before agents finally let him go. I asked why they were holding me if I was an American citizen, and they said I had to wait until they looked me up. Johnson said, I asked if they had a warrant, and I asked for a lawyer. They never brought one. Agents dragged children from their homes, naked and zip-tied to each other.
They was terrified. The kids was crying. People was screaming. They looked very distraught. I was out there crying when I seen the little girl come around the corner. Because they was bringing the kids out too. Had them zip-tied to each other. One of them literally laughed. He was standing right here. He said, them kids.
They were terrified. The kids were crying. People were screaming. They looked very distraught. I was out there crying when I saw the little girl come around the corner because they were bringing kids down too. They had them zip-tied to each other. She saw children, some of whom weren't even wearing clothes, dragged out of the building by ICE agents and then put into a U-Haul van.
Other neighbors say they saw agents destroying property to get in the building.
And they had a big 15-inch chainsaw with a round blade on it cutting this fence down. We're under siege. We're being invaded by our own military.
When he got home from work, Jones said he entered his unit to find all of his electronics and furniture missing and all of his clothes and shoes thrown on the floor. Jones said he had no idea who took his belongings and hadn't received answers from Chicago police. On Wednesday, toys, shoes, and food were still placed in piles in the building's hallways. Property managers were seen throwing mattresses and broken doors into the dumpsters. And what's the justification for all this force? It was to disrupt illegals, Venezuelans, supposedly TDA gang members, remember, who were designated as a terrorist organization on day one of this presidency. The raid in Chicago used the same tactics that our military has been using overseas for decades. This is how it worked overseas. Our troops would get an intel package saying there's a target at this location, and they would go hit that target in the dead of night using overwhelming force, using Blackhawks, using flashbangs, all the same tools and tactics that were used in Chicago. They would hit the target, they would round up every man, woman, and child inside. If anyone had a weapon, they would kill them. They would zip tie everybody, separate the men, women, and children. Then they would take away anybody that was on their target list or anyone they suspected of being a terrorist. That meant any military-aged male. And in Trump's first term, he expanded these powers broadly. He gave special operations much more powers to kill people on the spot in these raids. So this is Seth Harp talking about his new book, The Fort Bragg Cartel. He said Trump came in a typical Trumpian fashion, did the same thing as his predecessors, but just in a particularly gauche sort of way. You know, he sort of loosened the rules again. I mean, the rules around assassination are insane, and most people don't even know that the U.S. has an assassination program or that Delta Force operators are right now, as we speak, assassinating scores of people per month in places like Iraq, Syria, Somalia. The best information I have is that there's just some sort of really fuzzy requirement. Like if a person is found unilaterally by JSOC or CIA analysts pose a threat to Americans, then they're greenlit for assassination. Not only them, but anyone who's considered their financiers or facilitators or enablers. This is a textbook night raid. You hit the target hard, overwhelming force. You insert from the top of the building, from the bottom of the building. You throw in flashbang grenades to disorient people. You use overwhelming violence of force to subdue everyone. You zip tie and detain everyone in the building, and then you sort through them after the fact. And in Iraq and Afghanistan, if anyone had a weapon, if they had any hint of resistance, they would have been shot dead on the spot. What do you think would have happened if one of these U.S. citizens who are legal to own weapons came up to their own door because they heard explosions in their hallway and they came out with a gun? Do you think these ICE agents wearing body armor, carrying rifles would have just peacefully talked a guy down? No, they would have shot anyone dead in the hallway, just like they would have done in Iraq or Afghanistan. The Fourth Amendment protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures. For police to come into your home, they must have a signed warrant signed by a judge, which has shown that there is probable cause that you committed a crime that gives police the power to enter your home. I don't have the right words to convey how illegal and unconstitutional it is for federal agents to kick down the doors of U.S. citizens, drag them out in zip cuffs, and just stuff them in a van. Okay, listen to this. It was scary because I had never had a gun in my face, Fisher said. They asked my name and my date of birth and asked me, did I have any warrants? I told them no, I didn't. Fisher says she was handcuffed before being released around 3 a.m. and she was told that if anyone had any kind of warrant out for them, even if it was unrelated to immigration, they would not be released. That is not how anything works. That is specifically what the Fourth Amendment is there to prevent. You are not living in a free country if your federal police is allowed to kick down your door, drag you out in flex cuffs, and then decide and see if maybe you've committed a crime, and if not, you'll be free to go a couple hours later. That's not freedom. That's a police state. That's a militarized police martial law dystopian state. These are federal agents. They know better. They willfully, they knowingly broke the law. They knowingly violated the constitutional rights of every single person in that building. Every single agent that was on that raid needs to be in prison, full stop. This is how the Trump regime intends to quell dissent in this new authoritarian country. They are going to use these night raids on their political enemies, on anyone who resists and anyone who dissents, and pretty soon this pretense of illegal immigrants will be gone out the window completely, and they're just going to be hitting buildings, hitting houses, hitting compounds for anyone who dissents against this regime. The language that they're using, radical leftist Democrats labeling Antifa as terrorists. The U.S. Forest Service website right now says that the government shutdown is because of radical leftist Democrats. Do you see what they're doing? They're laying the groundwork, the foundations right now to designate anyone who dissents against this regime as a terrorist so that then they can use these tactics we perfected in the war on terror in the Middle East on the homegrowns, on people at home. Day one, when Trump came into office, day one, he signed an executive order to designate TDA, some of these other groups, as terrorists. And now what do we see? They use the pretext of fighting terrorism, fighting these TDA terrorists to terrorize this entire apartment building, to terrorize U.S. citizens, to drag children naked into the street, zip-tied to each other. And it's not going to stop at illegal immigrants. I have been saying this since day one. All of this is pretense and pretext to build up an authoritarian police state so that this regime can persecute anyone that it wants. Who are they going to persecute? It's going to be every marginalized group, anyone who is not a straight, white Christian man. We must raise holy hell about this. This cannot be allowed to stand. There is not one single major national news outlet reporting on this. Not one. This is the biggest domestic news story right now. We have just treated U.S. citizens in Chicago like we treat terrorists in the Middle East. This is insane. This is unconstitutional. This is illegal. This should be the biggest story. Please do your part. Please spread the word. Every single American needs to know this because it doesn't matter what your political affiliations are. Every single American knows that this is wrong, that this cannot be allowed, that if this is normalized, we are not living in a free country anymore.